Could you survive one day as a Roman gladiator? You're standing on hot sand. 50,000 people are screaming. Across from you is a man whose entire job is to end your life in the next few minutes. This is the picture everyone has of a gladiator's day. Almost none of it is true. Here's the question nobody thinks to ask. If gladiators really fought to the death every single time, how did any of them ever become famous? How did some fight dozens of matches, earn fortunes, and retire? A sport where everyone dies the first day doesn't produce legends, it produces corpses. So the real question isn't whether you'd survive the fight, it's whether you'd survive everything around it. And that's a very different story. Here's what we're actually going to find out. Whether you'd even live long enough to reach the arena, because the deadliest part of a gladiator's life wasn't the fighting. What your actual chances were once you stepped onto that sand, and the real number will genuinely surprise you. And the strangest truth of all, why the men trying to kill you were also worth more to their owner alive than dead, and how that one fact changes everything. By the end of this, you'll understand why almost everything you picture about gladiators is a Hollywood invention. Let's start before you ever see the arena. Here's the first thing that would try to kill you, and it isn't a sword. It's the training school, the Ludus. Before you ever fought in public, you belonged to a gladiator school, and life there was brutal in a way the movies never show. You were property, owned. You slept in a small cell, you were locked up at night, and your entire existence was controlled by a man called a lanista, who ran the school like a business, because that's exactly what it was. But here's the part that flips the whole picture. That business had every reason to keep you healthy. Gladiators were expensive. Buying them, housing them, and above all, training them cost a fortune, and a dead gladiator was a total financial loss. So the schools invested heavily in keeping their fighters alive and in peak condition. We know from archaeological and historical evidence that gladiators were fed a carefully managed diet, trained by professionals, and given medical care that was, for the ancient world, remarkably advanced. In fact, the physician Galen, one of the most important figures in all of medical history, got his start as a doctor for gladiators. He treated their wounds, studied their injuries, and later said the experience taught him an enormous amount about the human body. These men had access to some of the best medical care available anywhere in the Roman world. There's even a strange dietary detail. Analysis of gladiator remains suggests their diet was heavy in barley and beans, so much so that they were sometimes nicknamed the Barley men. Researchers think this diet may have deliberately built a layer of fat over the muscle, a kind of natural padding that could take a cut without hitting anything vital, and make wounds look dramatic and bloody for the crowd without being fatal. So that's the first loop closed. Could you survive long enough to reach the arena? Actually, your odds were better than you'd think, because your owner was financially desperate to keep you alive. You weren't disposable. You were an investment, but an investment that still eventually had to fight. So what actually happened when you stepped onto the sand? That's where the real myth falls apart. Here's the question everyone gets wrong. When a gladiator fight ended, how often did the loser die? The Hollywood answer is always. The real answer is one of the biggest surprises in Roman history. Most gladiator fights did not end in death. Historians who study this estimate that in the earlier, more established period of gladiatorial combat, a gladiator's chance of dying in any given match was relatively low, with many estimates suggesting something on the order of 1 in 5 or better odds of walking away alive from a given bout. The exact numbers are debated, and they got worse over time, but the core point holds. Death was the exception, not the rule. And once you understand the economics from the first loop, you understand why. A skilled gladiator took years and a fortune to train. Killing him at the end of every match would be like a football team executing their star player after every game. It made no financial sense. When a gladiator lost, he could appeal for mercy. And very often, mercy was granted, because everyone involved had a reason to want him to fight another day. The fights were also more regulated than you'd imagine. There were rules. There were officials who stood in the arena and could stop the action, enforce the rules, and pause a bout. Gladiators were matched by type and skill to make fights competitive and entertaining, not to guarantee slaughter. It was closer to a lethal professional sport than to random butchery. And the famous thumbs down gesture for death? Historians genuinely don't know exactly what hand signal the crowd or the sponsor actually used, or which direction meant what. The confident thumbs down equals death image you have in your head is largely a modern invention, cemented by a 19th century painting and then by film. So there's the second loop. Your chances on the sand were far better than the myth suggests. You were a trained professional in a regulated contest, and most of the time losing did not mean dying. But this raises the strangest question of all. If gladiators were so valuable, so protected, so likely to survive, then why did anyone die at all? And why would some men volunteer for this life? That's the part I promised you at the start, and it's the most surprising of all. Here's the truth that breaks people's brains about gladiators. Many of them chose it. We picture gladiators as slaves and prisoners forced into the arena, and many were, but a significant number were volunteers. Free men who signed up on purpose, and once you understand why, the whole world of the gladiator finally makes sense. For a poor free man in Rome, becoming a gladiator was a desperate but real opportunity. You could earn money, sometimes very good money, as a fighter. Winning gladiators received prizes and payments, and a successful one could become genuinely wealthy. On top of that came something a poor Roman almost never had: fame. Star gladiators were celebrities. Their names were scrawled on walls across Roman cities, the ancient equivalent of graffiti about your favorite athlete. We have found this graffiti. Crowds adored them. Some were described as heartthrobs. Poets wrote about them. In a rigid society with almost no way to rise, the arena was one of the very few places an ordinary man could become a superstar. But here's the price of that choice, and it's chilling. To become a gladiator, a free volunteer had to swear a terrible oath. He legally agreed to be burned, bound, beaten, and killed by the sword. In that moment, he essentially surrendered his status as a free citizen and accepted being treated as the lowest of the low, as property. So the gladiator existed in a bizarre contradiction that says everything about Rome. He was simultaneously despised and adored. Legally, he ranked at the very bottom of society, in the same category as slaves and criminals, considered disgraceful, and yet he could be famous, wealthy, admired, and desired. He was both the lowest thing you could be and, if he won, one of the most celebrated. That's the final loop. Some men chose this life, because in a world with no other ladder to climb, the arena offered the almost impossible chance of money, glory, and immortality if they were willing to gamble their body and their freedom for it. So where does that leave us? Let's put it all together. Could you survive one day as a Roman gladiator? Honestly, better than you'd expect. And for reasons that have nothing to do with your sword skills. You'd be kept alive because you were a valuable investment. Your fights would be regulated professional contests where death was the exception, not the rule. And the whole brutal system was propped up by the fact that fame and fortune were real enough that men volunteered to risk everything for them. Here's the part worth sitting with. Almost everything you thought you knew about gladiators, the automatic fight to the death, the guaranteed slaughter, the thumbs down, the pure victimhood, turns out to be a story we told ourselves long after Rome was gone. The reality was stranger and more human. It was a savage entertainment industry, yes, but it was an industry with economics, medicine, celebrity, contracts, and its own twisted logic. And that's the uncomfortable mirror, because when you strip away the swords, what you're really looking at is a society that turned human suffering into mass entertainment, made stars out of the people risking their lives, and packed the stadium every single time to watch. We look at the Colosseum and feel certain we're nothing like the people who filled it, but we still fill stadiums to watch people destroy their bodies for our entertainment. We still make the ones who do it rich and famous. We still look away from the cost. So the real question was never whether you could survive a day as a Roman gladiator. It's whether the crowd in that arena was really so different from the one you're part of right now.